Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a video on setting up a file and print server. In this video, we're going to start off by seeing what the latest and greatest activities are within the Global Mantics organization. And then what we're going to do is go right into the operating system and see how to install the file services role. Then we'll see how to maintain control over your resources by using NTFS permissions. I'm going to show you how to set up disk quotas, both the old way on a volume by volume basis, and then also how to do it using the File System Resource Manager, which is new to Windows Server 2008. Then we'll go ahead and install the print services role, install a printer, share that printer, take a look at printer permissions, and then we'll come back and take a look at how to troubleshoot common printer problems. So as far as what's going on with Global Mantics, well, the New York office is looking to set up a file and print server. And a couple of things they're going to do with this file and print server is, first of all of the users' documents folders, which was previously known as My Documents in Windows XP. In Vista, it's now just Documents. Well, these Documents folders will be redirected to a shared location on that file server. But users must be limited to storing no more than 1 gigabyte of data on that file server. And a printer needs to be installed and shared so that other users can access it and install it on their own client computer. So, as I said before, we're going to kind of get right into the operating system. We're going to go onto a Windows Server 2008 computer, and we are going to install the File Services role. After installing that role, we're going to take a look at NTFS file and folder permissions and see how we can secure some of the data using these permissions. We're going to set up disk quotas, and I will tell you what, there's one extra little step that we could stick right in here. Before we set up the disk quotas, we're going to set up something called folder redirection so that the user's documents folders are put out on the server, and then we'll set up disk quotas on those documents folders. And we're going to do disk quotas two different ways. One way is with the volume, and then the other way is using the File System Resource Manager. Now after we do all that, we'll go over to the other side of things. We'll go from the File Services side over to the Print Services side, install that role. We're going to install a printer itself, share it, and set up the permissions for that printer. Alright, well, let's go take a look at that server now. Okay, for this lesson we're going to need a new member server for the New York office. And so I've created one here just simply called New York Member 1. And I will tell you, if you're trying to follow along, all you need to do is install Windows Server 2008 and join the globalmantics.com domain. I have done nothing else with this server. There are no roles, no features, there's nothing installed yet. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the remote desktop icon and connect to that computer right now. Oh, and I will tell you, I suppose the one extra thing that I did do was I enabled remote desktop so that I could make this connectivity. So anyway, here I am on New York Member 1, and as I said, the very first thing we're going to do is install the File Services role. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Start and select Server Manager. Now, while we're waiting for Server Manager to open, I will tell you, you really don't need the File Services role to do most of the things that you need to do on a file server. I mean, for instance, two of the main things we're going to do here is take a look at NTFS file and folder permissions, and those can be set right out the box. You don't actually have to have File Services role installed for that. And then as far as setting up disk quotas, well, you can set up disk quotas on a volume by volume basis without installing the File Services role. As far as redirecting the user's documents folder to a share on a file server, you can do that without the File Services role. So you really don't need this role for most of the things you want to do. But I'll tell you what, let me click on roles, because I'm going to show you why we are going to do it. I'm going to click on Add Role, and I'll skip this page by default. This is that same default page we see all the time on a brand new installation. Click Next. And when I select File Services and click Next, you'll see here that I can then, well, it gives me an introduction, but then I select some role services. And the role services that I want to install, well, distributed file system, DFS, is something that we're going to get into in the next video. So I'm going to leave that alone and we'll add that later on. But here is the File Server Resource Manager. And this is a neat little utility that is going to give us some additional capabilities when it comes to our disk quotas and also when it comes to monitoring this file server. Now beyond that, you'll see there are some other choices. There's services for network file system, which has to do with collaboration with a Unix environment. We have the Windows Search Service, which is a way of enhancing our searching capabilities by indexing the hard drive. And that's something we're going to just go ahead and skip right now. But it's not a bad idea if you're going to have a lot of information and you need it to be quickly located. And then we have the Windows Server 2003 file services for backward compatibility to old Windows Server 2003 capabilities. So for right now, all we're going to do is the File Server Resource Manager and click Next. Here it's going to ask us about storage usage monitoring. Okay, so by default, when you install this file service, or I should say this role service, it wants to know, hey, do you want to implement the monitoring aspect of it? And you know, I'll go ahead and say yes. I only have my one C drive, so I'll check the box for that one drive, and you'll see here that by default what it's going to do is it's showing me that it's an 80 gig hard drive, and then we're going to put a threshold of 85%, which means basically let me know when we get to 85%. We know that we are going to begin to have problems if this drive gets to 85% full. Now there are other options. You can go in and you can manipulate this monitoring, but we're not going to go into that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And then here are some additional report options. You'll notice that it stores these reports on the C drive in the Storage Reports folder. And you could also receive reports by email. So if you want to go ahead and put in an email address or even go directly to a given SMTP server to make that delivery, you can do that. Again, for right now, we're not going to worry about that, but that is a nice feature to be able to receive these reports in your email so you don't have to go searching for them, trying to remember where you stored them out on a file server. You can have them right in your email inbox. It's also a nice little reminder when you get these reports, hey, maybe I need to do something. Maybe I need to look at those reports. I used to do that with my backups all the time. After backup ran, I used to have it email the log to me. And it wasn't so much that I needed the log in my email. I mean, I know where the backup logs are. It was that by coming in every morning and seeing that email, it kind of gave me a reminder, hey, this is something that should be looked at. Well, the same thing holds true here. And that's why it's a good idea to go ahead and receive reports by email. So let's go ahead and click on Next. Here's our confirmation screen and install. And now it's going to go ahead and install the file services role and any corresponding features that are necessary. And as usual, we have a bar that we're just staring at going across the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll be right back with you as soon as it's complete. Alright, the file services role installation is complete. You can see here it says installation succeeded. We got our nice green circle with a checkbox in it. So I'll click close. And now we've added the file services role and more specifically the file system resource manager. So let me go ahead and close the server manager. The next thing I want to do is we're actually going to come back to that file system resource manager in a little bit, but first I'd like to go through a bit of what's probably a review with you, and that is take a look at NTFS file and folder permissions. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Start and then click on Computer to go ahead and bring us into Explorer, and then open up our C drive. And on the C drive, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right click and select New Folder, just to go ahead and create a folder so that we can look at the permissions on that folder. Now, to be more specific, I'm going to name this folder User Docs. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this folder is going to eventually become the folder that we're going to redirect the user's documents folders to. So we'll name it User Docs. And then inside that folder, let me open that up. I'm going to right click and select New Text Document. And we'll just leave it as generic text document because we're going to leave that alone. That's going to be just temporary so that we can look at file permissions on an NTFS drive. So let me back out of here. And the way we look at NTFS permissions is by right clicking on the file or folder. In this case, we're going to look at a folder and go to Properties. And then on the property sheet, we're going to select the Security tab. Now this is the same thing that we just went over a few videos ago when we were looking at Active Directory permissions. As far as the way you go through and do this, it's exactly the same. The way you set up permissions on Active Directory objects is the same way we're going to do it here on a folder. So NTFS permissions, you'll notice we have a list of users and groups. And then down here is where we have a set of permissions that have been either allowed or denied for each of these users or groups. So if I click on users as a for instance, you'll see here that users are allowed to read and execute, list folder contents, and read. Now, in case you're wondering, the difference between read and execute is read means that you can open documents. Execute means that you can launch applications. And list folder contents means that you can read the contents of what's in this folder, but you can't necessarily open the items that are in this folder. That'll depend on the permissions that have been set on those individual items. So the choices that we have when it comes to folder permissions are full control, modify, read and execute, list, read, and write. And let me just make sure we understand what they all are real quick. I know we just went over these three. Write means that you can make changes or you can write to the folder. You could add documents to the folder. Modify includes everything else, includes read and write, but also gives the ability to delete items that are in the folder. And then full control includes everything else, plus gives you the ability to change permissions on this folder. Okay, so from kind of the bottom up, I mean the least capable permission would be read. That just means you can read things that are in the folder. Write means you can add things to the folder. Read and execute, you now add the ability to launch applications. Modify adds the ability to delete items, and full control gives you everything. Okay, so those are the NTFS permissions for a folder. Let me go ahead and hit cancel. Let's go back into this folder and let's right click on the document and select properties and take a look at the security tab and see what the permissions are here. Well, you'll notice that you have pretty much the same list. Full control, modify, read and execute, read, and write. Don't worry about the special permissions. We'll come back to that in just a moment. You'll notice these are the exact same permissions. The only difference is that because this is a file, not a folder, list folder contents would not make sense here, would it? So pretty much we have the exact same permissions on a file. Now as far as these special permissions, and I will tell you that special permissions also existed on the folder. There was a scroll bar here and I just didn't scroll down to show you. If I click on Advanced and then go into Edit and then click on Edit again on one of these choices right here, this is where we get into the special permissions. This is where we can get somewhat granular with our choices, kind of like we could with Active Directory objects, but we can't get quite as granular when it comes to NTFS permissions. But there is a little bit more flexibility. Matter of fact, the two specific permissions that I'll point out to you as far as special permissions go are the change permissions permission. I know that sounds redundant, the change permissions permission, but that's exactly what it is. You're allowing permission to somebody to change the permissions on this particular object, or this particular file or folder, I should say. And then take ownership. Every file and folder on an NTFS volume has an owner. Now by default, the owner is going to be whoever created the file or folder. But that ownership can change, and there are a lot of things that go along with being the owner. I mean, first of all, being the owner means that you, by an inherent right, have the ability to always have full-blown, full control permissions over the file or folder. And you may not see a checkbox for full control, but by owner, you have that built-in permission. It's just there. Now, the other thing that ownership has to do with is something we're going to look at in a little bit, which is something called disk quotas. Quotas, where you put limitations on how much space somebody can tie up on a drive, well, that space is determined on the ownership of the file and folders. So that's a couple of the significant pieces of having the permission to take ownership. Having that permission means you can change that ownership, take it away from somebody else, and make it your own. Let me cancel out of here, and I'm going to cancel all the way out of here and go back to the folder. Actually, let me delete this text document. We don't need it there. I'm going to back up and go to the properties of the user docs again, and go on the security tab. And first of all, just to show you, if I scroll down, we do have special permissions. Okay, but also I want to show you, notice there's no way for me to add anybody to this list. Well, similar to what we just saw in the advanced screen, where you have to click edit and then you can go in and add or edit, well, same thing holds true on our standard permissions here. I would have to click on edit, and then I can add users and groups to the list and assign them specific permissions. Also, let me go ahead and cancel out of here. You'll notice that by default, I can look at what permissions these users and groups have, but I can't do anything about it. If I want to make a change, again, I have to click on edit, and then I can go ahead and check the boxes. Now you'll notice these boxes are gray. Well, that's significant. The reason they're gray is to let you know that you can't change it. Watch this, or listen, I'm going to click the button. Okay, I can't check that box, or in this case, uncheck that box. And the reason why is because this permission was inherited from a parent container, from a parent folder, or maybe the parent drive, depending on where the folder is. And that can be recognized. Let me go ahead and click cancel. In this advanced window again, if I click on advanced and then click on edit, well, first of all, it's here even without clicking edit, but I want to show you where we can actually change it. Right here it says include inheritable permissions from this object's parent. Okay, so this is where we're saying, hey, anything that has been set in the parent folder, in the folder that I'm in, or the drive that I'm on. In other words, in this case, I'm inheriting from the root of the C drive because that's where I exist. Whatever permissions have been set at that level, I want those permissions also. If I don't want those permissions also, if I clear that box, you'll notice that I get asked a question. It'll say, all right, fine. You don't need to have those permissions anymore. I will no longer inherit anything from above, but I got a question for you. I already inherited some stuff from above. What do you want me to do with that stuff I already inherited? Do you want me to keep it, which would be copy? Do you want me to copy it and make it my own? Or do you want me to remove those permissions, which means completely disregard anything that was previously inherited from above? Okay, so those are the two choices you have if you want to stop inheriting. Let me go ahead and hit cancel. We'll go ahead and continue to inherit. Here we have replace all existing inheritable permissions on all descendants with inheritable permissions from this object. This is kind of the opposite. It's where we're going to take our permissions and we're going to force them down through the hierarchy to anything that's inside of this particular folder. Now I will tell you that by default in Windows Server 2008, all files and folders by default inherit. So if you do nothing, the default setting is whatever's been set at the root of the C drive is going to go ahead and propagate all the way down. And whatever I set within this folder that I'm in right now, user docs, is going to propagate all the way down. Okay, so you really don't have to do anything if you don't want to there. Alright. Now, the one thing that I want to do to this folder in order to allow the user's documents folders to be redirected to this location, there's two things I need to do. One thing I need to do is share it, which we'll do in just a moment. But the second thing we need to do is make sure that everyone has full control permissions to this folder so that they can go ahead and when that user account logs on, a folder can be created for them. So I'm going to click on Edit, and then I'm going to click on Add. And I could put everyone. Okay, there's everyone. But that could be a little bit dangerous sometimes. So what's recommended to do now would be to put in authenticated users, which is basically everyone, or in this case, everyone who has authenticated to the domain. So that works out a lot better. It's almost like saying domain users. So anybody who has the ability to authenticate, we're going to go ahead and give full control permission to this folder. Click OK. And OK once again. And now we have the folder, but now we have to share it. Now, I'm going to go into the details about sharing folders in the next video, but for right now, just to show you how to do it kind of quickly here, right-click, select Share, select a group. So in this case, I will go ahead and do everyone. When it comes to sharing, going ahead and doing the everyone group is usually okay. It's usually the NTFS side. You want to stay away from that. So I'm going to click Add. And then I'm going to make everyone what's called a co-owner, which is the highest level that you can be because only the owner can be the owner. But a co-owner is like giving full control permissions over this shared folder. So I'm going to go ahead and click Share. And now the folder has been shared. I'll click Done. You'll notice there's a little icon here representing that this folder has been shared. Now what we need to do is go ahead and set up folder redirection. And in order to do that, we need to go onto our domain controller and go into group policy. Now I will tell you before we get into this that first of all, we already covered group policy objects in a previous video. If you didn't watch that video and you don't understand group policy, I recommend that you do that first. But the other thing is that folder redirection doesn't have to be done through a group policy. It's just a quick and easy way to do it to a lot of people all at once. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is go ahead and minimize my connection here to New York Member 1 and make a connection to New York DC1, our domain controller. On the domain controller, let's click Start, Administrative Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. Because the first thing I want to do is show you something that I've already created. And if you're following along, you may want to do the same. In the globalmantics.com domain, I have created an organizational unit called New York to represent the New York office. And then inside New York, I've created a container called Users, where I've put a handful of users. You don't necessarily have to have as many users as I do. You could probably even get away with just one and see how this all works. But I wanted to go ahead and have something in place as a representation of the 500 users that we have in the New York office. So let's go ahead and close out of Active Directory Users and Computers. Click Start, Administrative Tools, and go to Group Policy Management. This is where we're going to go ahead and create the group policy object to do this folder redirection to that user docs share. So let me go ahead and open this up all the way. I'm going to expand New York, and then over here on users, I'm going to right click and select Create GPO in this domain and link it here. Okay, this is where I'm going to do the group policy object. This is going to be a group policy that is going to affect all of the users in this container. Now this group policy object is going to be for the redirection of the user's documents folder. I'll just name it folder redirection and click OK. And then I can go ahead and right click on the folder redirection GPO and select Edit. In the Group Policy Management Editor, I happen to know that folder redirection can be found under User Configuration, Policies, Window Settings. Okay, and here you'll see folder redirection. If I expand folder redirection, you'll see there's a lot of folders that can be redirected. The one that we're looking to do is the Documents folder. So the way we do this is right-click and select Properties. Now in the properties, you'll see that right now it's not configured. If we want to configure it, we go ahead and drop down this box where we can select either basic or advanced. Basic means that we're going to redirect everybody to the same location. Advanced means that some groups will go to one location and other groups will go to another. We're going to keep it simple and use basic redirection. Now, after we do basic redirection, you'll see here that there is a selection on what do we want to do in that location. And the default setting is usually a good one, which is create a folder for each user under that path. So in other words, once I put in / New York-mem1-2k8 / and then remember the name of the folder that we created? I didn't show you this, but when we shared it, we took the default share name, which is the same as the folder name, so it will be user docs. If we wanted to verify if that was true or not, all we'd really have to do is click start, and then on the start search put in New York mem1 2k8, and then you'll see it actually populates. There it is, user docs. And if I click on user docs, it opens up a folder, so we know that that's the right name. When I put in New York member 1 user docs, you'll notice down here it gives you an example of what it's going to do. Inside user docs, it's going to create a folder with the user's name, and then it's going to create a documents folder inside that folder with the user's name, and that's where the user's documents will actually be. The next thing I want to do is go up to the settings tab, and on the settings tab, what I really want to look at are a couple of checkboxes here. First one says grant the user exclusive rights to documents. That's a really good idea. Remember, we set up NTFS permissions to give everyone, or at least all authenticated users, full control. Well, you don't want users going into other users' stuff. So what this checkbox does is it makes it that when we create that folder for each user, give that user exclusive rights, exclusive permissions to that folder, so no one else can get to it. Very, very good idea. The next thing here is move the contents of the documents to the new location. What that means is if you have a user who has already been on one of your computers in the network before and they've already saved stuff to their documents folder, which would just be on their local C drive by default, go ahead and take stuff they've already saved and move it to the new location. Otherwise, they're going to be looking for it. They're going to say, wait a minute, I go to documents, I know I saved it there, it's gone. Because it didn't get moved. It's still sitting on their local C drive, which they really can't see anymore unless they know to navigate down to it through Explorer. And beyond that, there's also the ability to have backward compatibility with Windows 2000 and Server 2003. We're not going to worry about that for right now because everything in New York is Vista and Windows Server 2008. And then we also have something with policy removal as far as what you want the users to do if this policy were to go away. We're not going to worry about that right now either. So I'm going to click OK. And it gives me a little warning saying, hey, you realize anybody who's using Windows 2000 or XP or 2003 is going to have a problem. And yes, I know that. So click yes. And now we've set up folder redirection in this group policy object. So I'm going to close this. And if I want to verify this, I could expand users, click on folder redirection, click on settings. Go ahead and close this. This is just Internet Explorer security, basically. And if I scroll down through here, you'll see here that the only thing that has been enabled is folder redirection. Okay, so we have successfully set up that group policy object. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of here. Now, the only thing that I still need to do is I need to look up a couple of users for us to go ahead and log in as. So let me go back to Active Directory for a minute here. Back to Active Directory users and computers. And I'll just take the first two on the list, A. Fry and A. Lewis. Okay, so again, if you're following along, you don't have to use these exact same usernames. Okay, this is just a list that I have of the employees in Global Mantics. You could create anything you wanted to create. So let's close out of here and minimize New York DC1. Now let's go back down to New York Member 1. And on New York Member 1, there's something else that we need to do. See, we've set up the folder, we set up the permissions, we set up folder redirection. Well, now we need to put our quota on this folder to go ahead and make the restriction that nobody can save more than a gigabyte of data. Now, the old way that we used to do this is we used to have to do this on a volume by volume or drive by drive basis. In other words, if I right click and go to the properties of user docs, you'll see there's nothing here about quotas. If I cancel out of here and back up a level and right click on my C drive and go to its properties, here you'll see there's a quota tab. And on this quota tab, we could go ahead and enable quota management, which is basically saying, all right, we want to go ahead and have some level of control over how much data people can store on this drive. Remember, we're doing the entire C drive now. We can choose as to whether it's what's called a hard quota or a soft quota. A hard quota means you check the box saying deny disk space if they get to their quota. A soft quota means nope, don't deny them, just put up warning messages letting them know they're out of space. Once we decide if we want to make it hard or soft, we then have to select a default quota for all users. And that limit could be set to, well, in this case, it would be 1, and then we would go to gigabyte, right? And then we could set a warning level as, for instance, let's say when they get to 900 megabytes. Okay, that means when a user gets to 900 megabytes, they can be given a warning saying, hey, you know you're getting low on disk space? And we could choose as to whether events will be entered into the event logs when a user reaches either a warning level or has actually exceeded their quota limit. Now beyond this, we could also create a quota entry, which is where we can now break it down to individual entries for specific users. So I could go up here to new quota entry, and now I could select a specific user. And here, so as a for instance, we'll put in, I think it was A Fry was one of the users. And that particular user, we could then limit to either a smaller or a greater amount than the default. Okay, so these are all things that you could do originally, and I'm going to actually cancel out of all this. Let me undo everything here. Hit cancel. Just to make sure, let me make sure I didn't click OK here along the way. No, I didn't. Okay. That's how we used to do it, and you still can do it that way, but that's going to be for the entire C drive. We now have the ability with the File System Resource Manager to look at it on an individual folder basis, which is something that's been asked about for a long time. I mean, since disk quotas were first created, people have been asking Microsoft, why can't I do it on a specific share? I don't want to have to do it on the whole drive. So, in order to see this, what I'm going to do, let me go ahead and close Explorer here. We're done with that, I think. So I'm going to click Start, Administrative Tools, and here we have the File Server Resource Manager. In the File Server Resource Manager, there's a number of things that we can do here. We can also do some file screening management, which is where we can go in and create rules basically on the types of files that users can save. So you can get really, really specific with this tool if you really want to get deep into it. And as a for instance, maybe you make it that the users can save .doc files and .xls files for like Word and Excel documents. But maybe you want to avoid letting anybody save a .exe file, any kind of an executable. You know, there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. Also, here's our storage reports management with regards to the reporting aspect of keeping track as to how things are taking place on your file server. But what we want to look at right now is quota management. And more specifically, here we have our quotas. And here we also have quota templates, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. But here we have quotas. Let me expand this and show you quotas. And you'll see here that we really don't have anything. The only thing we have here is that original report that we had. So I'm going to right click and select Create Quota. And now we need to give it a quota path. In other words, what do we want to set a quota on? And this is where I can select Browse. And you'll see here that on my C drive I can select User Docs. So now I'm going to put quota limits on this specific folder as opposed to the entire C drive. There is no one right answer. I mean, maybe doing the entire C drive is perfectly acceptable. But if you want to do it on a folder, or maybe you have different folders and you want to have different rules, you can do that. Now, we can choose to auto apply a template and then pick one of these templates that were already created, or we can go ahead and create our own quota on this specific path. When we create our own quota, we can either derive the quota from one of these existing templates that Microsoft has given us with the operating system, or we could go ahead and define custom quota properties from scratch. Again, there is no one right answer. If one of these templates is very close to what you think you want to do, well, then go for it. And I will tell you that if you were to select a template, like I'm going to select this one for just a moment and click Create, I could then go in here and I can edit the quota properties and I could make changes. Okay, so I don't have to leave the, well, actually I would have to copy, and then once I copy the template, I could then go in and make a new template. But let me go ahead and let me close out of this and let me actually delete this quota. We're going to create one from scratch. So right click, create quota, and we're going to browse to our user docs folder, and we're going to define custom quota properties. Click the button here for custom properties, and this is again where you can copy a template. Okay, so start off with a template and then make a copy and then make changes, or you could just go ahead and forget the template and go ahead and make your own quota. So let's just go ahead, and you'll see here it always kind of starts off with this one by default. We're going to go ahead in here and say 1 gigabyte. Now they actually use the terms hard and soft quota, which I mentioned a little while ago when we were looking at the old way of doing it. We want to make it a hard quota. Nobody can store more than 1 gig. And then we can also now create notification thresholds. And this is kind of cool because as opposed to the old way where we basically had one threshold, now we can create different thresholds. So I'm going to click Add. And in this case, we're going to create a percentage of, we're going to say when it's 90% full, we can do what? We can send an email to the administrator. We can send an email to the user. We can make event log entries. We can run a command, right? We can go ahead and tell it to do something specific. I've seen commands where it does a form of auto archiving when a drive gets too full, that kind of a thing. And then we also have reporting mechanisms as to if we want to keep track and see reports on who's using how much at any given time. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select, just keep it real simple here and just put in 90 and not select anything else here. It's kind of buried here, but let me move this up just a little bit. And here's where I can go ahead and click OK. And then I'm going to click OK once again. And now you'll see here that I have a quota where I'm going to put a limit of 1 gig and set a warning at 90%. Create. Now, besides creating the quota, what do I want to do with it? Do I want to save this custom quota as a template to use to simplify future quotas that I'm going to create? Or do I want to save it without creating a template? In this case, I'm not going to create a template. This was very simple, no real template needed. So I'll click OK. And now you'll see that the user docs folder has a limit of 1 gig. By the way, you'll notice that the original C drive, this one that's right here, let me expand this out so we can see everything. This original C drive here, it's currently 8% used. The limit's 80 gig, which is exactly what, expand these out, it's kind of hard to see sometimes, which is exactly what the size of the drive is, meaning there really is no limit. The limit is when it's really full. And even there it says soft, which I find kind of funny because how could it be soft? You're out of space. So anyway, that one is kind of meaningless as far as this screen goes, other than it's showing you how full it is. And then here we have the user docs folder, which is presently 0% full. There's nothing in there. And there's a limit of 1 gig, and it's a hard quota. When they hit a gig, they're cut off. All right, so we have set up our quotas. So let's go ahead and close out of the File Server Resource Manager, and I'm going to minimize New York Member 1. And what I need to do now is go ahead and connect with New York Vista 1, but I can't use my remote desktop connection this way because I want to log in as different users, whereas my shortcut's going to always log me in as the administrator. So I'm going to go to the actual New York Vista 1 computer right now. Okay, on our New York Vista 1 computer, we're going to press Control-Alt-Delete to go ahead and log on. We don't want to log on as the administrator, so I'm going to switch user, other user, and we're going to log in as A Fry and put in the secret password, same password I've used for everybody. And you'll notice here it says I'm logging on to the Global Mantix domain because New York Vista 1 is a Vista client that is a member of the Global Mantix domain. And now we'll log in. Now this might take just an extra couple moments here to log in. One, because it's the first time this user's logging in, so the profile is being created. And two, and we're going to have to see how this works out, because I'm going to talk to you about something here in just a moment, but the documents folder may be being redirected to that shared location, which the first time that's done, that takes a little bit longer to do. Alright, so it has logged in here, and we got a lot of extra stuff going on here because this is the first time we logged in, and so let's just go ahead and close out of a whole lot of this stuff and get it out of the way. Yeah, we're just going to make everything go away and look pretty and not bother us. I guess there's some icons here that are going to stay. We'll just leave them. That's fine. It's a typical Vista machine. Got a lot of stuff going on. Alright, let's take a look and see if it has indeed redirected the Documents folder. The way we see this is by clicking on Start, and then right-clicking on Documents and going to Properties, and then clicking on the Location tab. Okay, you'll notice that in this case it has already relocated to the shared location. Now the reason that I'm saying that it may or may not have is I have noticed that when it comes to folder redirection and Vista, even though this is something that should update when the user logs in because it's a user-based GPO setting, for whatever reason in Vista it requires a reboot. Now I booted up this Vista computer after I set the GPO, and I think that's why it worked out this way. But if you're following along, and if you just came to this screen and you saw C:\users etc., well, the way you fix that is to go ahead and reboot the computer, and then everything will look fine. And you'll notice that where it went to was New York Member 1, User Docs, but then it created a folder for A Fry, and then a folder for Documents. And what I'm going to do, let me cancel out of here, is I'm going to click Start again, and I'm going to select the Documents folder. And in this case, I'm going to create a new text document. We'll name this Fry's Doc. Okay, so because this is a document for A Fry. My doc. Alright, make a little change to it there. Okay, so we've saved a document. What I want to do now is go ahead and go back to New York Member 1 and manually look to see if that document has been created, if that folder's been created. So let's go back over to New York Member 1 now. Okay, back here on New York Member 1, I'm going to go into the computer here, go into my C drive. Now remember, I'm still logged on as administrator on New York Member 1 right now. So I'm going to click on User Docs, and you'll notice there's now a folder in here called A Fry. Now if I go into the A Fry folder, here's a Documents folder, right? Just like it said it would be there. If I go into the Documents folder, uh-oh, I don't currently have permission to access this folder. Click Continue to get access to this folder. Okay, continue. You've been denied. You know why I've been denied? Because when we set up that folder redirection, we said give exclusive rights to the individual users. Even though I'm logged in, let me click Start just to show you, I'm logged in as administrator. I'm the all-powerful. I've been locked out. Now, if I want to change that, I can change that because as administrator, I have certain privileges, like I can go in here and I can change those permissions, or if need be, even take ownership. But it's just to show you that this is all working. The stuff did redirect, documents were able to go in, but those documents were limited to the individual user who created them. Now, another thing I want to do, and I don't know if we're going to be able to see this from just that one document, but let me click on Start, Administrative Tools, and go to the File Server Resource Manager, Quota Management, Quotas. Now, it still shows 0%. What I was hoping for here was maybe to get like 0.01 or 0.1%. As we put stuff in that folder, you'll see this number go up. But that one tiny little text document just wasn't enough when it came to, against 1 gigabyte to make a difference. Alright, so let's go ahead and close this, and go back over to our New York Vista computer. Okay, back here on the New York Vista computer, what I want to do is I would like to log off. I'm going to go ahead and log in again. I'm going to switch user, other user, and this time I'm going to log in as A. Lewis. Put in my secret password. And basically all I want to show you is when I log in here now, I'm going to log in and show you how once again there will be a new folder created in that share for A. Lewis and a documents folder put in there. Alright, here we go. We've been logged in. We got all our extra stuff coming up. We'll just leave that all there. It's not really getting in the way. I'm going to click Start. First of all, let's look at the properties of our documents. And you will see here under Location that it's in the right place. The next thing I want to do is actually select the documents. Okay, then I'm going to close that gadget bar if it comes back up again. And in here, we're going to go ahead and create a new text document. And we're going to say Lewis's doc. I won't even go into it. Here's a document. But here's what I want to show you. Let's get this out of the way. There we go. If I click Start, and then under Start Search, double backslash New York-Mem1-2K8 backslash user docs, you will see here that there are actually two folders that have been created, one for A. Fry and one for A. Lewis. Now if I go into the A. Lewis folder and then go into Documents, you'll see there's Lewis's doc. And if I try to open it, it opens. We didn't put anything in there, so it's still blank. Close that. Back out. But what if we try to go to A. Fry? Well, we can go into A. Fry, but it says the folder's empty. And that's because as another regular user, I have no privileges whatsoever to that Documents folder, so I don't even see it there. Okay, so this is kind of cool, and this all works out really, really well when redirecting users' stuff out to a file server. Alright, well, we've pretty much set up our file server. Now we need to set up the print server side of things. So let me go ahead and close out of all of this and log off. And what I'm going to do is head on back over to the New York Member 1 server, and we're going to implement the print services role. So back here on New York Member 1, I'm going to install another role. So where do I do this? Server Manager. So I'll click Start, select Server Manager. In the Server Manager, I'll click on Roles. I will click to add a role. And I will tell you once again that similar to the File Services role, the Print Services role is actually not completely necessary to make yourself into a print server. So I'm going to click Next. Here's a introduction to what print services are. I'm going to click Next again. And really the only reason I'm even going through this and showing you this is for what we're doing, we don't even need this. So for all practical purposes, for what Global Mantics needs, we're just spinning our wheels right here. We don't need to do any of this. But Here we have the LPD service, again for interoperability with Unix. And then we have internet printing if we want to set up the internet printing protocol, which would allow us to access this printer through a browser. Neither of which we're looking to do right now, so we're just going to do the basic print server, next, and install. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while we wait for the print services role to install, and I'll be right back with you when it's complete. Alright, the installation is complete and has succeeded, so I'm going to click close and go ahead and close out of Server Manager. Now I will tell you that what I'm going to do now is pretty much what should be review for you, but just to make sure, let's go through and set this up. I'm going to click Start, and then in Control Panel. Now I could make this part of the Start menu. Matter of fact, I'm going to do that. Let's right click on Start and go to Properties, and then next to Start menu here I'm going to click Customize, and then I'm going to scroll down here, and right here is a checkbox for printers. Click OK and OK, and that makes it that when I click Start, Printers shows up on the Start menu. If you're going to be a print server, probably a good idea to do. Otherwise you have to go through the control panel and it's a much lengthier process. So I'm going to click Printers, and now what I can do is I can right click and select Add Printer. If I don't like right clicking, there also happens to be a button right up here, Add Printer. When I click that, I now get the choice of adding a local printer or a network printer. And what we're going to do is add a local printer. Even though it's a printer that's going to be out on an IP address, it's still local to this computer because this is going to be the print server. A network printer is if you're adding a printer that has already been installed and shared somewhere else. So add a local printer. We're going to go ahead and say that this printer is on a TCP/IP port, which you'll notice does not exist. So we're going to create a new port, standard TCP/IP, next. We'll go ahead and either select what type of device, we'll say it's a TCP/IP device, or we could auto detect. Give it the IP address, 192.168.10.250. Now I'm going to tell you, by the way, there's no physical print device hooked up to my computer with that IP address right now. That's just an available IP address. I know that's not being used on this network, and we're going to emulate as though there is a printer hooked up right there. You notice here it says query the printer and automatically select the driver to use. So when I click next, it's actually going to go through here and it's going to try to detect it, and it's going to fail. And it's going to fail because there's no actual print device hooked up to my network right now. So we'll give this just another moment and watch it fail. And as you can see here, it basically says, look, I can't find it, so what is it? And so here I can go ahead and just say it's a generic network card, or if I happen to know what type of card it is, I can put that in. But we'll leave it as generic network card because this is a hypothetical printer. And click next. And now again it's going to try to detect the driver model, and it's going to fail, so give this just a moment and it will fail, and then we will manually select a driver. And again, as you can see, it did not select one for us, so we need to select a driver. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and pick HP, and I'm going to put in an HP LaserJet here. Let me scroll down. I'm just going to do I'll do LaserJet 5. There we go. There's HP LaserJet 5. That's a fairly generic driver. Click next. It really doesn't matter, by the way, in this instance because it's all hypothetical, but you would obviously select the driver that correlates with the specific printer that you have, and if it's plug and play, it may automatically detect and you won't have to do anything with it. I will also select this as being my default printer. The name HP LaserJet 5 is fine, or maybe I would even call it New York HP LaserJet 5. Click next. And now it's going to go ahead and install the printer on this server. And now I have the option of, do I want to share it? And I'm going to say yes, I do want to share it. That is something that we said we want to do. So we're just going to call this, how about we just call this New York LaserJet? Okay, so that's going to be the share name, New York LaserJet. Click next. Typically, if we had an actual physical print device, we would print a test page to prove that it's working. In this case, we don't have one, so I'm going to not bother printing this page and click Finish. And you'll see that I now have New York HP LaserJet 5 and a couple things that I want to show you. If I go into the Properties, I can go to the sharing tab, and this is where you'll see that it's shared. But there's also one extra step that we could do, and that is we could list this printer in Active Directory. We could do what's called publish it to Active Directory, which means users could locate it from Active Directory as opposed to having to access it as a direct share across the network. Now down here, well, actually before I go down here, here's a checkbox for render print jobs on client computers. Okay, this is where we're going to determine, do we want to render all the jobs here on this server, or let the jobs go ahead and render themselves and do the work out on the clients? Really, this comes down to performance. In other words, do you have the capability of handling all of these jobs for all of your users on this one server? And then also comes down to management. Do you want it all to be managed through this server? Okay, so that's a checkbox you could go either way with depending on your circumstances. Now if we go down here, here's a button for additional drivers. You will see that by default, we pretty much will go ahead and have all the drivers for all x86 or all 32-bit Microsoft operating systems. If I was using 64-bit client operating systems out there, I would need to check this box to go ahead and add those drivers so that they could automatically be installed down to those clients. And if I had any Itanium computers out there, I could check that box. But in this case, all we have is x86. We just have the 32-bit Vista client out there, so we're going to leave that alone. Oh, actually, before I click OK, let me show you a couple other things. On the Ports tab, you'll notice the port 192, scroll down, 192.168.10.250 is a TCP/IP port. Shows me where I'm connected. Okay, under Advanced, you can see the driver that's being used. You also have the ability to set priorities and scheduling. Okay, and just to kind of, again, this is just a review. You should already know how to do this, but scheduling makes it, well, just that the printer is only available during the hours that you allow if you set up a schedule. Priority is if more than one print job comes in for more than one printer, and one printer has been set up with a higher priority than the other, well, then that job is going to get priority. Okay, so that's another couple things that we can do here. And the last thing I want to show you here in the properties would be the Security tab. On the Security tab, this is where we can set up printer permissions. And they work just like we saw earlier in this video with NTFS permissions, or like we've seen in previous videos with Active Directory object permissions. And that is that we have a list of users and groups, and then a selection of permissions to allow and or deny. And the three permissions that we can set for printers are print, which you'll notice everyone can print. That means everyone can go ahead and connect to this printer and print to it. That also gives people the ability to manage their own jobs. If they sent the job into the queue, they could go ahead and delete it from the queue. I'm going to skip over this one and go down to the last one here, Manage Documents. That's really the next one up on the how much we can do list. And Manage Documents, if somebody has been given that permission, that means that they can manage everybody's documents, not just their own. So they could reorder, they could pause, they could delete, they could restart, they could do anything they need to do to anybody's documents. And then we have the Manage Printers permission, which is what's known as the full control of printing. Okay, there is no literal words, full control, but that's what Manage Printers is. It means you can do everything, you can change permissions, you can do anything you want to do on that particular printer. Alright, we'll just cancel it out of here. I don't think we made any changes. And what we need to do now is go over to our Vista client and see if we can install this printer that we have installed and shared. So let's go over to that Vista client now. Okay, back here on our Vista client, I'm going to press Control-Delete, and you know what? I'll just go ahead and log back in as A. Lewis. Right? Just a regular user on our network, and we want to see if A. Lewis has the ability to go ahead and install this printer. Let's not run yet. Startup. Close this. Start. And again, you'll notice printers is not here, and in this case, I'm just going to go to Control Panel. And I happen to be a big fan of Classic View, because in my opinion, it's a lot easier to find things than trying to do it through here. So I'm going to click Classic View. By the way, back under Control Panel Home, Printers was right here. Classic View, which is the one I happen to like. If we go over here, you'll notice here is Printers. And what I want to do is now add a printer. But this time we're going to add a network printer because we're adding a printer that's been shared by a print server. And here you'll see that it went ahead and searched and found the New York HP LaserJet 5. It's out there on a network that I'm close to, so it found it. So yeah, that's the one I want. Next. And now it's going to go ahead and attempt to connect and install this printer on this particular machine. And it should work. Do I want to set it as default? Yeah, I do. And you'll notice it already says it's been installed with the appropriate driver. And why is that? Because the drivers are stored on the server, so you don't have to carry them around with you to the individual computers. Again, you typically would print a test page, but there's no real physical print device, so I'm just going to click Finish. And now, this printer has been created out on the client. Everything is working. So, that's pretty much everything that I want to show you on setting up a file and print server. Let's go back and take a look at troubleshooting printing. Now, when troubleshooting printers, I cannot emphasize enough how important this KISS method is. Now, KISS, K-I-S-S, stands for Keep It Simple Stupid. And that's just it. Very often when it comes to troubleshooting printers, it's the most obvious thing, and that's the last thing that we're looking for. It could be as simple as being out of paper or out of toner. And this can usually be figured out by just taking one quick peek at the actual print device and say, oh, look, it's got a message on the screen saying I'm out of paper or out of toner. Most today's printers have these screens that tell you that. It could be a paper jam. Now, if it tells you that you have a jam somewhere, again, most of today's printers, they'll actually instruct you on what to do to clear the jam. Open the front door, pull out the paper tray, open the back door, pull out the toner cartridge. They'll give you instructions on how to find that jam. Or maybe it's just not turned on. Someone hit the power button. Or over here, I've actually put the word offline. Now this goes back to older printers. Most of today's printers, it's either on or off, but some of the older printers, and even some of today's printers, there's actually what's called an offline status. So the printer can physically be on, but it might be offline. I've seen that recently with some all-in-one printers, where you have a printer where it's not only a printer, but a copier and a fax machine and a scanner, and that's typical that you might turn the printing capabilities offline so as to not get in the way of maybe some scanning or faxing or printing that you're doing. Or again, maybe it's not plugged in. I mean, there's a lot of really obvious things that would prevent somebody from being able to print. Now, the next thing to consider would be, it could be a networking problem. Again, very often, people will call into, let's say, help desk and say, I can't print. And the first thing that you're trying to figure out is, well, what's wrong with the printer? Now, yes, I do want you to still use the KISS method. I still want you to check for some of the basics, like is it out of paper, toner, jammed, things like that. But very often, the problem may not have to do with the printer at all. It has to do with a networking problem, a communication problem. The user can't actually get to the printer, or maybe the user on their client machine can't connect to the print server. So sometimes you want to do some basic troubleshooting to see, especially in the case of TCP/IP printers where they have their own IP address, have the user check for basic connectivity with the printer and or the print server. Now, the last thing I want to point out here, and this is very typical, not only is this typical test environment type question, but also in real world, it is very, very common that you can end up in a situation where certain print jobs are sitting in the print queue. And I'm going to I'll show you that print queue. Very often print jobs will be stuck in the print queue. So you'll see them just sitting there waiting to be printed, but they don't print. So you say, all right, I'm going to delete the job, and the job won't delete. Well, what you need to do to solve that problem would be to restart the print spooler service. Now, let me go ahead and show you how you would do that. So back here on New York Member 1, Basically, all we're going to do here is go ahead and click Start, Administrative Tools, Services. And in the services, we scroll down to the P's where we'll find the print spooler service. And basically, you can restart the service. There is a selection for that. But I like to actually stop it all the way, let it come to a complete stop, and then go ahead and start it again. Now, the one thing you need to know is that when you do this, you're going to go ahead and lose the print jobs that you already had sent, so you're going to have to send them again. But it's a great way to unfreeze the printer. So that's pretty much how you would do that. Alright, now the last thing I'd like to do with you before we wrap up this video is let's go through a quick review on something that has to do with NTFS permissions, and it really has to do with the NTFS permission strategy. And this is something that for the most part, not necessarily exclusively, but for the most part, you would only care about if you're taking the test. This is something that Microsoft has pushed heavily, and they have tested on since, well, as far back as I've seen Microsoft exams. And it's not to say that I haven't seen it in the real world, it's just that you don't see it very often. But anyway, Microsoft recommends that there's an NTFS permission strategy called AGDLP. And what that stands for is that you're supposed to take your user accounts, so there's the A, and put them into global security groups. And those global security groups will then go into domain local, which is the DL, so into domain local groups, which will then be assigned the permissions, or P, to access the resources. I know, it's confusing. And if that's not confusing enough, there's actually a few different versions of this. You have AGDLP, which is what we just said. There's AGGDLP, where you have what's called global group nesting. AGUDLP, where the U stands for universal groups. And then we can really get crazy with AGGUDLP, where we have global group nesting within a domain and then also use universal groups. Let me show you a few of these just to make sure that we're clear. Here's an example of AGDLP. GlobalMantic has some users that work in the accounting department, and they need access to documents that are in a spreadsheets folder. Alright, well, here I have a group of users, or I should just simply say a bunch of users. I want to clarify to stay away from the word group. And the reason why is because they're all going to become a member of the accountant's global group. So within the GlobalMantic's domain, we're going to create a global group called accountants. Then that group is going to become a member of a group called the spreadsheet folder access group. And that group is going to be a domain local group. And then the spreadsheet folder itself, that's where we're going to go ahead and assign permissions to the domain local group. And what ends up happening is, since the domain local group has the permissions, the accountant's global group, by being a member of the spreadsheet folder access domain local group, inherit those permissions. And then, of course, the users, by being a member of that group, inherit the permissions. And I know it might seem like some extra steps, but this is the way Microsoft has always pushed that this be done. Now, the more sophisticated version, where we have global group nesting, the example would be if we had in our GlobalMantic's organization users who work in accounting who are divided into two different areas of accounting, accounts payable and accounts receivable. But they all need access to documents in the spreadsheets folder. And the one thing I haven't said here is they all also could theoretically need access to different resources, meaning accounts payable might have their own resources and accounts receivable have their own. But where they all need access to the same folder, you take your accounts payable users, put them into the accounts payable group, the accounts receivable users, put them into accounts receivable global group. You take these two global groups and you do what's called nest them into one accountant's global group. And then the rest of it is the same. The accountant's global group goes into a domain local, and then the spreadsheet folder gives permission to the domain local. It's the same concept, a little more sophisticated. Now, one more example I'm going to show you is the AGUDLP. Yeah, got a little bit of a mess of a diagram going on here now, don't we? Now, GlobalMantics has 3 domains, which actually we do, right? GlobalMantics, North America, and Asia. And in each of these domains, there are people who work in the accounting department, and they all need access to documents in a spreadsheets folder, and that spreadsheets folder happens to reside in, now here I've just listed it as domain A, B, and C. This could be, if in our structure, this could be globalmantics.com versus North America and Asia. But anyway, in each of the 3 domains, we're going to do A into G. In other words, we're going to have the users go into a global group within the domain. And you'll see that we do the same thing here, and we do the same thing here. So that's the A and the G. Each of these 3 domain global groups get put into this All Accountants Universal Group. And I will tell you that although this Universal Group is just kind of sitting here out in no man's land, technically this Universal Group resides usually, it doesn't have to, but usually in the forest root domain. All right, let me clear some of that mess out of there again, because now we've done AGU. The U, then, the Universal Group, gets put into a domain local group, which will reside in the domain where the folder is, so that the folder can then assign permissions to that domain local group. Confused? Wonderful. Join the club. Matter of fact, that's so confusing that I am not even going to give you the 4th example. There's just not enough room on the screen to really show this to you. But AGGU DLP, right? So we add the extra G in here. That would basically be just like if we went back to this AGG DLP. Okay, if we did this part right here. Actually, let me clear this out. If we did this part right here, in each of the 3 domains, okay, so we did that in each of these 3 domains, and then the rest of this would be the same, where the domain group goes into the universal group, and the universal group goes back into a domain local, which gets the permissions to access the resources. Very confusing. But if you're going to take a Microsoft exam, you have to know it. Always had to. All right, well, that's how you set up a file and a print server. So at this point, after watching this video, you should now know how to install the file and or print services role, implement NTFS permissions, and make sure you understand AGDLP and all of its variations. And I will tell you, there's additional variations even beyond the 4 I laid out there. But that's the basic concept, AGDLP. You should know how to set up disk quotas, either on a drive-by-drive basis or through the File System Resource Manager. You should now know how to install and share a printer and do some basic troubleshooting on your printer problems. All right, well, that's all I got for you. I will see you in the next video.